To understand the eventual role of engineers in relationship to this diversely structured set of nation states and the German concept of progress now requires stepping back a little bit and exploring the role of the arts, the role of music, and the role of literature in these relatively autonomous, independent states over time prior to 1870. When people who are relatively unfamiliar with this complex German political history think about Germany in the 17th or, let's say, the 18th century, what do you suppose, what sorts of names tend to emerge as both marking something that's specifically German and at the same time somehow significant? In what areas do these names tend to fall? Generally, it may be art or perhaps literature, but certainly in music. People tend to think especially about classical composers. The names Bach, Beethoven, Mozart. These are the visible names. The fact that they're visible offers a significant bit of insight into the emerging German concept of progress. The independent states, now remember that inside the Holy Roman Empire, the states were largely independent of one another. But they were at the same time, they were prohibited from competing with one another through military means. They were not permitted, basically, to beat up on one another because they existed in the face of the overwhelming military power of the empire itself. And, of course, of the larger states that constituted it. This was a complex structure. Often the states in the Holy Roman Empire turned to the arts, to music, and to literature for this purpose, as a vehicle for competition. They provided patronage to the artists, patronage to the composers, and to the writers, who in turn promised to demonstrate through the quality of their work the cultural superiority of the state that supported them in relationship to other states. So what we had here were ruling princes who were working to demonstrate it in the context of other princes in their states. That basically each prince making the case that my state is better than your state because my state provides the cutting edge of advancement in cultural terms, both within the empire and beyond. For example, as the sociologist Randall Collins wrote in his book, The Sociology of Professions, and I'll quote here, quote, "The geopolitical fragmentation of Central and Western Germany made competition in the new cultural marketplace of literary publication a substitute for military glory of the smaller state." So the point being that these culture arenas of high culture, provided a vehicle for competition and for demonstrating cultural and hence political superiority. So these states, they even supported development of physical institutions for the arts, including museums, many of which exist to this day, state-supported museums in Germany. With the rise of humanism, the idea that society consists of human beings who organize themselves as citizens to produce national governments, there's all this happening during the Enlightenment, with its images of progress for humanity in general, competition in cultural life began to shift. It began to shift from the traditional focus on arts and literature to areas that demonstrated the emergence of reason. And the advancement of reason would be the indicator of human progress. And Prussia, in particular, became a center, a self-appointed center, for these new ideas and strategies to both indicate and stimulate the emergence of reason. The emergence of reason was going to be the indicator of cultural progress. And key to this change, key to demonstrating the emergence of reason, involved establishing governmental support for education, which had been controlled in previous eras wholly by the church. Prussia led an expanding movement that stressed the individuality of the student and the moral duty of the state to educate all of its citizens. Prussia also took the step of linking education, liberal education, to the structure of governmental bureaucracy, conceptualized as a rational structure. So here are a couple examples to illustrate that point. In 1770, Prussia established an examination, a test, for employment that served as a prerequisite for employment in the Prussian bureaucracy, which placed a premium on university legal training. You couldn't pass the test if you didn't have significant legal training. And by passing the test, you got access directly to the German administrative bureaucracy. In 1804, Prussia enacted a new regulation making 3 years of study at a Prussian university a prerequisite for all higher offices in government. If you don't have the right education, you can't serve as a rational leader of our state. Now, in part, these innovations, Prussian innovations, were indeed born out of a fear that the Prussians had of democratic mass movements, which they had witnessed to the West. And they amounted in part to a strategy to preserve the hereditary leadership of the nobility. But these were significant changes, nonetheless. They were changes that helped to make the state, the site, the center, the locus for the fulfillment of reason, and hence for human progress.